All right, so this is the title of my talk. I agonized over it for quite a while, but it is Serge Abiteboul, a scientist, a friend, a mensch. So what is a mensch? A mensch is a Yiddish term that is used to describe a person of integrity, honor, and decency. It's a compliment that conveys the idea of someone who is responsible, considerate, kind-hearted, often with a strong sense of ethics and morality. In Jewish culture, being called a mensch is high praise, indicating that the person is not only good, but also acts with compassion and empathy towards others. And this, in summary, is how I see Serge. So maybe we can applaud him on being a mensch. And as a true friend, Serge has allowed me to do wonderful things. For example, to publish in a language I don't speak, and to have fun while doing it. And I was looking through my notes as I was preparing for this talk, which is part of the reason that I did so well on the quiz, Tove, is because I was actually looking back at Serge's DBLP and books, etc. And the last thing that Serge and I published together is a short story that is called My Roast Beef is Biased. And its title is shown here in French. And when it was published, it was accompanied by Serge's illustrations. I'm going to tell you the story, an abbreviated version of the story, because I think it's actually quite funny. And why I read this excerpt from the story to you, please admire and enjoy Serge's illustrations. So, my roast beef is biased. Systematic discrimination by an algorithm is called bias. Biases may have different origins, and they all correspond to real-life situations. To illustrate this, consider making roast beef. Pat decides to publish a website of family recipes, starting with the most popular one, roast beef. Pat's mom, her sister, and brother all make roast beef in pretty much the same way, like grandma does. They all use the same recipe, the same algorithm. Their decision to make roast beef in this way shows a kind of a familiarity bias, giving preference to familiar tastes and experiences over novel ones. When selecting a familiar roast beef recipe in a biased way, Pat is not doing anything wrong. She simply follows a pleasant family tradition. But in other cases, familiarity bias can be harmful. It can lead to unlawful discrimination in hiring, lending, or in granting parole. Harmless as it is, Pat's family roast beef recipe will allow us to discuss different kinds of bias. How might you choose a roast beef recipe to follow? Pat's family is rather mainstream. They use beef and garnish it with parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. What song is this from? Scarborough Fair. The bias introduced by the selection of training data is sometimes called pre-existing bias, because it comes from recipes that existed before you considered making that roast beef yourself. One practice turns out to be rather peculiar in Pat's family. They cut away slices at the two ends of the roast before putting it into the oven. Why might you think they're doing this? Let me make this interactive. Why would somebody cut parts of the roast before putting it into the oven? It's too small. So Amelie is very smart, or read the story, or both. Right. The oven itself is too small. And this was the oven that the grandmother used to make roast beef. Now, the oven today is no longer too small to fit a full roast beef, but they lost the reason, right? So they just keep doing it in the same way. And this is an example of technical bias. This is on top of pre-existing. In computer science, such bias may be introduced, for instance, because an improper data representation was chosen. And it may not be easy to catch because computer programmers always tend to assume perfection of their code, or at least they rarely question a piece of code that works. To introduce the last kind of bias, I'll read it. Let's go back to medieval England, and I will tell you a fully fictional story here. Once upon a time, there was a town with two chefs who had invented competing roast beef recipes. The Duke, who had heard about the new recipes, came to try them. Unfortunately, one of the chefs had a cold on that day. So only the French chef from Lyon could present his roast beef for the tasting. The Duke loved it so much that he introduced it at the king's court. Had the other chef not caught a cold on that fateful day, Pat's roast beef recipe may have been very different. This is called emergent bias. The more people use the recipe, the more popular it will become, and the more people will use it. And this will make the preparation of roast beef more and more uniform. Now, Pat's website is not too popular with the millennials. Many of them are vegetarians and cannot care less for roast beef recipes. That's on the bottom right there. A generation bias? Okay, so this was our story. And then, of course, the next compulsory thing one does when one gives a talk like this is ask something of ChatGPT. So what did I ask? I asked, how did Serge Abiteboul and Julia Stoyanovich meet and become friends? And it replied, Serge and Julia likely met through their shared academic and professional interests in data management, databases, and data ethics. They may have met at conferences, workshops, or through collaborations in academia or industry. Over time, their shared passion for advancing data management and ethics may have led to a friendship based on mutual respect and admiration for each other's work. ChatGPT got things half right, and it doesn't know this, but Serge and I, we go way back. Serge and I first met at SIGMOD 2010 in Indianapolis, and he doesn't remember this probably, but I do. And what I remember from that encounter is that I was starstruck, absolutely. I was a postdoc at the time in Susan Davidson's lab. And then I also remember that he smoked these really funny slim cigarettes that somehow stuck with me. And I don't remember what the brand was exactly, but I liked this ad. So we're going to assume that it was Virginia Slims, and Serge can confirm or deny this. Now, one thing that ChatGPT got wrong also is that Serge and I developed our interest in data ethics together. And interestingly enough, I don't have a recollection of who came up with the idea first. If we trust the order of authors, then it's definitely Serge, although I did appear as first author on this CACM paper that I'm highlighting here, called Responsible Data Management. And it's a really great read. I highly recommend that you read this paper. And another interesting fact about this paper is that it was Serge's last paper, according to DBLP at least. And this is a dubious honor for me, having allowed Serge to complete his career in co-authorship with me, but it is what it is. Now, let's go back to the beginning, and I'm going to start approximately where Tova left off, right? So Tova mentioned as his last two projects, WebDAMlog and data ethics. So this is kind of where I came in. Serge and I started working together when he generously included me and later on my first PhD student, Vera Moffett, in his work on the WebDAMlog project. And I had lots of fun with data log and with distributed computation. And we made some sort of ugly but very clear slides together. I will show you a couple of these slides. This is from Serge's ICDE keynote. This is why I knew that he gave a keynote at ICDE. In this paper, we address the challenges faced by everyday users who interact with inherently heterogeneous and distributed information. Managing such data is currently beyond the skills of casual users. And we described our ongoing work at the time on the data log system. And this is one of Serge's slides that is, again, very clear. Benny and I will be giving a tutorial in a couple of days on how to give unclear, boring, and inaccessible presentations. This slide, I think, would really pass our bar for clarity, although it's not the most visually appealing. And it summarizes the goals of the project, more or less. And then we also published a paper together in SIGMOD 2015 with my PhD student Vera Moffett and with Jerome Miklau, where we spoke about collaborative access control in WebDAMlog. And I'm not giving you any details really of this, but I just want to highlight that there was in fact some technical work that Serge and I did together. The motivation here is that suppose that we have a couple, Alice and Bob, who are getting engaged. Their friend Sue wants to make an album of photos in which they are tagged together. Sue gets a brilliant idea to collect the photos from all the friends and family of Bob and Alice on their social network. And she is going to use delegation. That is to say that she will write rules for the remote peers to compute the album on her behalf. And first, she's going to get the friends lists from Bob and Alice. Then she will poll all of these for the photos. And now Sue has this photo album of photos, and some of them are quite embarrassing, like the photo on the left. So the question that we're addressing in this paper is, how might Sue share these photos? Who should see which photos, essentially, in this giant photo album that she has collected? The illustration that I showed you before maybe wasn't the most fortunate, but now with the help of my brilliant PhD student, who is also an artist, Fala Arif Khan, I could produce a much better visual to describe what we aimed for in this fine-grained access control with WebDAM-log, that there is this object and everybody sees it different. Right, and so I'm not going to talk about any details here, but essentially this is how things would work without access control, but with delegation. And then you can add a relation, an access control relation that essentially annotates your data, your tuples, to say which users have which permissions on these tuples. And then when you compute the content of this view that is the photo album, it's going to, with the help of query rewriting, figure out, depending on who you are, which photos you would see. And I also want to dazzle you here with a couple of graphs, just to show that we did performance experiments. We compared our solution and an optimized solution and a baseline. And so it was a real systems SIGMOD paper. But then Serge and I decided to work on something completely different, namely to start building out an agenda behind what we then called data responsibly. And of course, the right way to do this is to publish a manifesto. And this is exactly what we did. This manifesto was published in the SIGMOD blog in November 2014. And it was also published in Le Monde in a somewhat abbreviated version a month before then. And again, in French, which is amazing because I don't speak that language. And in fact, I probably just mispronounced Le Monde. So what I wanted to point out about this paper is that although it was published really in the early days of what we now call responsible AI or responsible data science, I reread it when preparing for this talk today. And many of the points, all of the points, I still stand behind. And I really think that it was a very, very good and thoughtful paper, especially considering, how long ago we wrote it. And 2015 is not long ago, but by the time scale of the area that I'm talking about, this is the very early days. So we spoke about the 3 dimensions of responsible data analysis. These are fairness, which is construed as lack of bias, and consequently as non-discrimination. We spoke about transparency, both on its own merits as a concept, but also as a prerequisite for accountability. And we spoke about equal availability of data, of computing resources, of network access. And this is not something that is getting a lot of attention actually these days under the responsible AI umbrella. And then we also spoke about what it would take to make our society more responsible in terms of its data analysis practices. And there we spoke about education and specifically singling out data literacy. We spoke about the importance of pushing for reasonable, interesting, meaningful regulation and laws and public policy. We spoke about the importance of user organizations and, of course, about the importance of building technical tools that would allow everybody, but specifically technical people, to design their technologies in a responsible way and to verify that the way that data collection and processing is proceeding is responsible. So I'm not going to bore you with the details, but it's quite a good and concise read. And now, following up on that manifesto, Serge and I co-organized, together with Jérôme Miclau and with Gerhard Weikum, a Dagstuhl seminar in July 2016. And it was an absolutely amazing gathering. And you can see a lot of folks from our community in this photo. It's a little bit small, but many of you are in this room today, right? So Amelie was there. Irini was there, Benny was there, Evi Pitura. Serge, of course, was a co-organizer. Jag, I saw earlier today. I don't know if he's in the room, but he was there. Fabian, right? And in addition to us data management folks, there were also really amazing people from other communities that have been forming the foundation of what was then called FAT, Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency, and is now called FACT. And these were Sorel Friedler, Solon Barokas, Suresh Venkatsubramanian, Christo Wilson, and Ben Zevenbergen. And Shaiten Bar was also there from the NSF, and he has been extremely helpful in helping push for funding also for this research agenda in the United States. And one thing that I remember is that we spent a couple of hours diligently trying to come up with a fairness definition to rule them all. I don't know if you folks remember this. We were at the whiteboard, right? Trying to really define fairness in a way that will satisfy everybody, and failed spectacularly. And I think that this was the beginning for many of us to really realize that such a definition or a purely technical point of view on this topic is really out of reach. All right. And so there are a couple of papers that Serge and I co-authored on this topic. This is the last one that I already mentioned, responsible data management. It's also with Bill Howe, Jagadish, and Sebastian Shelter. And then there's also a paper that Serge and I wrote on transparency, fairness, data protection, neutrality as data management challenges in the face of new regulation. And if any of you are interested in thinking about these topics, I'd love to discuss them with you. But now let me, for the next 5 minutes, actually just focus on things that Serge has done that are not computer science, and that is absolutely amazing to see, kind of the diversity, variety of the types of interests that Serge has. So the first 3 are computer science textbooks that he has written. But then after this, there are some books. Most of them, unfortunately, are still only available in French. But there's one called The Age of Algorithms that I will return to, that I read cover to cover and that I use very often in my teaching, especially in the public education. So these 3 books are on the topics of data and information and the importance for the citizens really to understand what are the impacts of data and technology. I don't know, Serge, what these books are about because they are in French, but I love the covers and I wish that I could read them. And here are 3 more books also with amazing covers. Maybe Serge can tell us what they are. And 2 more, and 2 more. So this is much more than 12 books. Tova, you could have added another option there. And in addition to being an author, both of technical work and of work that is between the technical and the social, and then of these last few pages worth of books that are actually, very much kind of popular interpretations of technology, if I understand correctly, Serge is also, of course, has done a lot of work of a public intellectual. He has been publishing he has been keeping the Binaire blog for Le Monde. He also publishes other blog pieces explaining technology and regulation of technology and similar concerns to people. And I know that this takes a lot of his time, but this is extremely important work that he does, and I really admire Serge for doing this. So here I'm showing just a few of the papers that I found, and there are many, many more. And last but not least, I hope that Serge will tell us in his closing remarks a little bit more about the play that he wrote, and that he has actually been playing already a few times, and I hope that it will become available in English and also perhaps be performed in English and in the US. I'm going to sort of finish at least this part by returning to the book that I mentioned a few slides ago called The Age of Algorithms that Serge co-authored with Gilles Devec. And this is a book that I use very often to explain that everybody has to exercise agency in their interactions and with data collection and data analysis and algorithms and AI. And there's a quote from this book that I really like and that I modify slightly. It says, "Creations of the human spirit, algorithms," and then I add, "and AI, are what we make them. And they will be what we want them to be. It's up to us to choose the world we want to live in." And I think that this quote is very representative of what I see as Serge's approach to research. to impact and to life. And this is an approach of doing what you're passionate about and really taking agency and responsibility for your actions. And in summary, I want to be like Serge when I grow up, if I ever grow up. He has influenced me in many, many ways, professionally and most of all personally. And in a sense, seeing him succeed in research while also allowing himself to follow his passion in other areas of life gave me permission to do the same. He gave me permission to do things I enjoy, even if I'm not that great at them, and even if they don't lead to publications and to tenure, for example. And he gave me permission by being himself to trust my instinct and to also partner with other talented people. I'm showing you here a website that was recently redesigned of my center called the Center for Responsible AI, where you can take a look at all the various types of work that we do. A lot of it is research, but a lot of it is not research.